timetable, when will you prepare a draft statement of investment priorities?
That is set to be within the first
15 months?
Yeah, about 15 months out. That's item 4, as you see it. To the left, milestone 4, scope task 2A and 2C.
Well, this sounds like dreams all over again. I watched the dream stuff go on where we saw the state spend a ton of money on consultants to try to get all the facts out there and describe islands and so on. And the one thing that was never put into play were ideas from the consultants and the agencies on what a state investment strategy should be. But we have a statutory duty to do a state investment strategy.
Right.
Seems to me, unless you start with what the best brains that are available through ARCADIS with a plausible investment strategy, the conversation will be as aimless as dreams turned out to be, and as divided as you have indicated in this report. I mean, in some sense, I have increasingly been concerned that what we're trying to do is smooth over all the political fights that have been going on for 100 years, when no one is going to be able to do that, in my judgment. And instead, what is lacking is some kind of relatively clear set of investment strategies for the state of California that people can react to, as opposed to negotiating terms and conditions with everyone. I mean, DWR's had the authority to do this. The Central Valley Flood Board, at least within their jurisdictions, had the ability. Nobody's done it yet. And what's different here? And 15 months out does not meet with the timelines we set in the Delta plan.
Can I take that?
Sure. I'll follow up.
From the outset, what we're looking to do is build a transparent process that supports the deliberation and discussion of different values. The planning tool used within the context in Louisiana was built, and it did take time, in a transparent manner that required the input of data and values and constraints to yield basically an informed analytical discussion of how those values and constraints affect outcomes. So I understand the concern or maybe the desire to have ARCADIS talk about a strategy, but in the end, that would be maybe another opinion in the echo chamber. So what we're looking to do is
how do you interpret the statutory language in Water Code Section 85032J, which says that the liability of the state for flood protection in the Delta or its watershed is not affected by the Delta Protection Act? I read that as clear a statement as possible that the state is not interested in having its financial liability expanded. Now, maybe there's a different interpretation you guys have, but if this is a state investment strategy, this is fundamentally about who pays for what. And at what point do you grapple with that? And at what point can we turn to consultants and say, what's your best recommendation? Mm-hmm. And 15 months out is a long, long way away, because we promised to deliver our recommendations to the legislature January 2015.
That's right, and I actually think that I will take the blame for that, because honestly that's not ARCADIS's responsibility. It did take us a year to develop the interagency agreement with DWR to secure the funding in the first place. So we are behind on schedule, but I think that we are doing everything possible under this contract to expedite the outcome, making sure that along the way we are getting the right amount of data, the right amount of public outreach, and it is a challenge and it is time consuming.
And I think also just with the scope of what we're going to look at in terms of beneficiaries and the categories of beneficiaries and cost allocation, we're going to start the process of looking at allocating.
How can you evaluate beneficiaries in a cost formula when you don't have your principles established first? I mean, it seems to me you implement principles as opposed to study endlessly the details of what's going on and then hope that magically they emerge in a consensus process, which will not happen.
Phil, if I may, I would argue that we have established the principles, that they're in the Delta Plan, that they're guided by the Delta Reform Act, and that is the context in which we are working with ARCADIS in this contract. Cindy, would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
Let me try another approach. In 2005, General Joe Schrodel, who was then the Army Corps General in charge of this area, told an audience gathered in Monterey that the United States does not have enough time nor money to sustain the Delta in its current configuration. That would suggest that a levee prioritization plan is going to include some areas that are going to receive amount of monies that locals will be happy with, and other areas where they might not be happy with. Mm-hmm. What was your experience in Louisiana with the process that you went through? Were you able to devise a plan that made everybody happy, or were there some areas that were dissatisfied with the outcome because they weren't going to receive the level of assistance that they had either historically received or were hoping to receive?
Right. I can say within the context of Louisiana, as Cindy mentioned earlier, consensus in some respects was not achievable, but what was achieved was an understanding of the process and the deliberation and the discussion, such that was everyone satisfied? No. But what was developed was the understanding and the transparency in that decision-making process, such that the plan was supported and adopted. So, I mean, in the environment there, the solution set right now in the 2012 master plan is a $50 billion plan. But arguably, even with that investment, there's the coast. It doesn't fully meet everyone's desires and each stakeholder's desires. But the key was to have a process that was deliberative and analytical, and one that could be supported, and that was what was achieved through a decision tool or through a planning tool.